We're good.
Right. Thank you, Sasha. So we'll call this meeting of the Executive Committee of the MAPC to order. This meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to a very recently signed piece of legislation allowing these remote meetings, which I understand might also still have some kinks to be worked out. So we are going to try to keep votes to a bare minimum as part of this meeting. My name is Adam Chaptelaine. I serve as Vice President of the MAPC and in my day job currently as Town Manager of Arlington, and I'm stepping in for Aaron Wortman, the President of the MAPC, who was unable to be in attendance at the meeting today. So refresh me, Mark. I will do the roll call right now to get an attendance. Is that the right next step?
That is correct, yes.
All right, so I will quickly call through the roll, and if you're here, if you could just answer in the affirmative, that would be appreciated. Sharonda Almeida?
Here.
Keith Bergman?
Present.
I think, Heidi, you said Karen Canfield's not here?
Yep.
All right. Adam Chaptelaine, I am here. Robert Cohen? Okay. Mayor Curtatone? I think Tom Daniels also not here. John DePriest?
Here.
Yolanda Greaves?
Here.
Sandra Hackman?
Here.
Mo Handel?
Here.
Tabor Keeley?
Here.
Angie, do I pronounce your last name Lou?
Here.
Thank you. Steve Olenoff?
Here.
Caitlin Pasafaro? George Proakis?
Here.
Courtney Rainey?
Here.
We said Jenny's not going to be here. Vandana Rao? No. Sam Seidel?
Here.
Steve Silvera?
Here.
Lauren Shirtliff? Mayor Spicer? Juan Vega?
Present.
Elaine Vanya?
Is not here.
Is not here. And Aaron Wortman is not here. And we have past President Buzz Constable here.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. I think that covers everybody. So with that, why don't we, Mark, am I turning it over to you to introduce newly elected, they're newly elected, but not new officers?
That's fine. It's not really new officers. It's one new member of the executive committee.
Okay.
And that is Angie. And I will begin with an apology to Angie. I had anticipated sending that chat only to you, but I screwed up and I sent it to everyone, which is only embarrassing to me. I would note that, Angie is a person that I and other members of the staff have worked with very closely for many years now. I can't tell you how high an esteem I have for her and the work she's done at Asian CDC in 3 of our communities, in Boston, in Malden, and in Quincy. And she has been a gubernatorial appointee to the board for a while now, and then ran for executive committee at the May annual meeting. And I think we want to give her an opportunity to introduce herself. And Adam, I don't know how you want to handle other members of the board introducing themselves to Angie. I'm not sure we go through 20 people with introductions, but I'm going to leave that to you.
Yeah, it probably feels a little clunky here on Zoom, but hopefully we'll be able to get back together in a room soon enough. But Angie, I think we'd love to hear a little bit about you and your, what you'd like to achieve serving in this role.
Sure. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Mark. So yeah, I'm really excited and honored to join the executive committee at MAPC. So as Mark said, I am currently the executive director of the Asian Community Development Corporation. And we started out in Boston's Chinatown, but over the years, our footprint has also extended to Quincy and Malden. Some of you may be familiar with the Community Development Corporation model that first came out of the 1960s. And the theory of change is really about a very local, place-based model of community residents coming together to undertake community development and economic development within their own hands. My organization is actually one of the younger ones out of that movement because we did not come into being until 1987. Over the years, we have evolved into an organization that now does affordable housing. We get involved in community planning, family asset building, and economic development issues. And I think we are a rather unique community organization in that we are both place-based, but also constituent-based, so that we're based in not one neighborhood, but 3 areas, because we're following the low and moderate income Asian American community. And that's how we ended up in Quincy and Malden. I've been at ACDC for 8 years now, from my very beginning there, and even my predecessor there, Janelle Chan, had a very close working relationship with MAPC. I think we've done some really fun planning initiatives over the years. And I think MAPC brings a unique resource, but also regional perspective. And that oftentimes we tend to, it's easy to lose that when we are so focused on a very, very local issues that we're working on, sometimes in just a few square block area. And I think this past year during the pandemic, I think, as everyone has seen, the pandemic has really taken a magnifying glass and really allowed us to see the inherent inequities in many of our systems, including planning, but access to benefits, access to opportunities, access even to natural resources as we think about climate change. And I think MAPC is a really important organization in the region as a leader in these areas. So I'm excited to join all of you and also learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Welcome. It sounds like you'll be a much needed and welcome member of the group. So thank you so much for making the time commitment. We really appreciate it. So Mark, on this agenda item, did you want to give under B any greater description of the role, or how would you like this item to be?
I'll speak very briefly. I think that, we have a wonderful executive committee. We always have. We typically have about 22 out of 25 people at any given time. And we have managed to maintain that even when we don't serve lunch, which is what we used to do. I think that, it is unusual within this organization that we often have competitive elections for these positions. I think the people who run are committed regionalists. They come to the board bringing wearing the hat of their own community or their own constituency or their own experience, but they always try and apply that to what is best for the region. The board, the council tends to be dominated by towns, because 80 of the 137 or so members of the council are from towns. But the way the executive committee is put together, there tends to be a real balance among towns, agencies, cities, and gubernatorial appointees. And that gives us a breath to discuss regional issues and to see if we can reach consensus even on thorny ones. One of the big upcoming objectives for this executive committee, one of its most important tasks, will be in September to review and hopefully approve our new regional plan, Metro Common 2050. I think it's fair to say that only a few members, I'm looking at Keith and Tabor, maybe 1 or 2 others, I'm not totally sure, were on the executive committee when Metro Future was adopted in 2008. And we now have, not 10 years later, but 13 years later, a new regional plan. And reviewing those policy recommendations, the vision, the research, and the other elements of the plan over the summer will be an important objective for this executive committee. And then in September, one of its most important votes.
Great.
I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything about the executive committee or about MAPC.
No, I think you described it
Okay.
very well. So thank you for that, Mark. And again, welcome, Angie. So moving on to agenda item 3, we're scheduled for the presentation of the Charles W. Elliott II Scholarship to Ariana Cenia from Ashland High School. Were we expecting her? Should we wait until she joins us, Mark, or
Well, it's Heidi.
Heidi?
Yes, I let her know that there had been a possibility that we would not have the meeting today.
Okay.
And the notice to her that we were holding it was just a little bit too late for her to be able to join us. So I told her we try to do the, make a presentation later on in the summer.
Okay.
So.
Great. Thank you. All right, so that will close out agenda item 3. Number 4 was the approval of the minutes, but again, Mark, to confirm, we're going to pass on that till the next.
Right. We're going to do the minutes in July.
Great.
So we'll have May and June and July. Or, yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, this is some of the most efficient meeting management I've ever witnessed here. We're moving right through the agenda.
There is plenty more to do. Don't worry. We will hit that.
So with that, we get to agenda item number 5, and I'll turn it over to our treasurer, Sam, for his report.
Thank you, VP Adam, and congrats on your news. I wish you all the best. I hope that all gets figured out.
Thank you.
Make your next move. I'm Sam Seidel. I'm the treasurer of MAPC, and this section of the agenda, we're going to look at the April 2021 income statement as part of the treasurer's report, which you should have received in your packet. I will just draw your attention to a couple of numbers on it, so you have a sense of what's happening in April. You'll notice that direct labor is higher than budgeted, coming in at 112%, so a little bit higher. That's in line with March, and it looks as though that section of time was sort of the agency getting back into swing, people having more time and actually more staff on board to do some of the work. The administrative expenses were higher as well, and that is also in line with March. But it leads to an overall overhead rate of 120%, which is lower than the 123% that's approved. The only other number I would note up above is that the total revenue is at 64%. The revenue tends to sort of come and go over the course of the year, but when you get to the end of the year, it looks pretty strong. The only point there is that there was very little pass-through money in that. So the net income at the end of the day was still very solid. If we go back to the overhead rate of 120%, the cumulative, so switching over to the right-hand column now, the cumulative overhead rate for the year is 121%. In my brief conversation with Sheila in preparation for today's meeting, she's really following that closely to see where we end up. We're approved at 123%. And the goal, as I understand it, is to get as close to that approved number as possible. But there's a small possibility we'll come in a little bit below that. So we're keeping a close eye on that. Nothing else particularly to note in the April income statement. So I would entertain any comments, questions, or a motion to accept the report.
Sam, Angie was just asking to confirm the fiscal year period.
So we finish June 30th. So is the end of the fiscal year. July 1st starts the new fiscal year. So April, so right now our current date is mid-June. The actual year will end in a couple of weeks. We're compiling the income statements April, May, June. And then the books actually remain open for a couple of months after that as we get all the final numbers in for the fiscal year. So we don't actually have a final until later in the summer, but the actual fiscal year will end in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks from now.
We have approved our budget, as I think most people know, back in May. So at the annual meeting, the budget was approved. That will go into effect on July 1st. The receipt of funds through contracts and appropriation seems very strong. I will be honest with you. I think Rebecca shares this view that I am more concerned about having enough staff at the moment than I am about having enough money. We have 2 open positions in land use. We have a few other open positions in the agency. It's important to get those filled. On the overhead issue, 123 was really high for us. We went to that level because of COVID, knowing that we were going to have potentially additional sick leave and additional FMLA, which increases overhead. It's both a problem and a positive sign that we're actually struggling to reach 123. It means not as many people are getting sick or asking for leave as we may have anticipated. But next year we're going back down to 118, which I believe is where we were in the previous fiscal year. And those just are a few comments for context, I think, especially for Angie.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And
But
Sam, I think we're going to pass on a vote today, Sam, just because of the for anybody who joined late, we're in this little bit in between period where the legislation extending the remote meeting provisions has been signed, but the exact clarity on when it takes effect and some of the specific details of it, I think, are still being reviewed. So just to be safe and not potentially run us into having votes that would be invalidated, I think we're just going to avoid or minimize votes today.
Thank you, Adam. That concludes the treasurer's report. Handing it back to you.
Mo has a question.
Yes. Can I ask a parliamentary question?
Please go ahead.
Many organizations do not require a vote on a treasurer's report because it is a report. That would save us time going forward if that were the case here, unless it's in our bylaws.
Yeah, unless Mark or Heidi tell me differently, I've always assumed it was a vote of courtesy. A vote of, really a courtesy vote. I don't think it's required.
I tend to agree with that, but we'll check the bylaws and make sure. The treasurer's report has been adopted every month since I got here. I know that. So
right. But I mean, it's just one more thing that would make the meetings more efficient if we don't have to take a vote.
Why don't we'll take that up with the officers, Mo, and I think reach a conclusion about it.
Great.
Efficiency is always warranted, but the overly quick rolling back of longstanding traditions is perhaps to be wondered about. So yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Mark. And speaking of that, Mark, it's your turn to provide the report of the executive director.
So you received that this morning when we determined that we were going to actually have a meeting today. I'm opening it on my screen, so if I don't appear to be looking at all of you, it's because I'm actually looking at the report. If you'll bear with me, I will just point out a few critical items from there. I'm going to start with arts and culture, as I think you know if you read the email that I sent out late yesterday. The most important development in arts and culture is not in the report, but is a personnel issue, and that is that Jen Erickson, who has really is the founder of the arts and culture department, the founder of our arts and culture practice at MAPC, is leaving the agency on July 9th to spend more time caring for her family, including her little boy Miro, who is, I think, just about a year old, a little bit more, and also returning to some of her artistic work. I know we're all going to miss Jen. We don't lose directors at MAPC all that often, frankly, very rarely. But Jen has been just an incredibly integral and important part of this organization, always focused on issues of social justice and racial equity, always asking us to be more than we have been in the past, which is exactly the kind of person that I like to have running departments, and always hiring great people and raising the funds necessary to expand our agenda and our activities. As I indicated yesterday, she played a critical role. She's been here for 12 years, but she played a critical role in the Sustainable Communities Grant, which we got under the Obama administration. She actually established the equity team at MAPC, which continues to operate. And she also established arts and culture. She was never satisfied with doing just one thing. She always moved on to something else. I I will tell you that Jen has a tendency to put a lot in the executive director's report, and sometimes in the old days, to prevent the loss of trees, I would have to trim it down. But this month, out of courtesy and respect to her, I left most of it in there. So there's a very substantial indication of the work of the Arts and Culture Department, which I would urge you to go through. I would particularly draw note to the first one. We have been using art and culture as a way to reach out to people in low and moderate income communities about COVID safety practices and about vaccination. And the call for artists has resulted in some wonderful art that has been created and which will be unveiled at an event in the very near future. It is scheduled, I guess it's June 22nd. And I urge you all, if you can, to participate. It's going to be a joyful activity. And it also represents part of MAPC's ongoing efforts to get the vaccination rate up in low and moderate income communities and communities of color throughout our region and throughout Massachusetts. So I would draw your attention particularly to that item. When Jen leaves, Anna Sengupta, who is currently the acting director of Arts and Culture, will become director of Arts and Culture. Rebecca and I have reached that conclusion, and that will open up an additional position in the department, which we will post, although we may start by posting it internally. Moving on, if I can, to the Clean Energy Department. There's a tremendous amount going on there, and it's very heavily focused on issues of heat. Several of the items here are focused on helping folks throughout the region to deal with heat during the summer, particularly difficult because a lot of our practices there had to change, and a lot of individual practices had to change. As a result of COVID. We all know that cooling centers are not as successful and as well used as they used to be, but that has not stopped MAPC staff from working to figure out new ways of helping cities and towns to keep their residents cool. And so you'll see a lot of information about that in the Clean Energy Report. A lot of things going on in data services, a lot of research reports that have come out on a wide variety of subjects. Including one that I might note in regard to the Commonwealth Builder Program at Mass Housing. I would urge you to look at some of those, read the summaries. You can always click on the links and have an opportunity to review the reports that have come out. In environment, again, our Accelerating Climate Resiliency Grant is doing a great job giving grants to individual communities for critical climate resiliency projects. But also this year, starting with the creation of a new community of practice and speaker series, which is extending the benefits of this program, not only to the grantees, but to wide numbers of other participants. That was a goal that we really shared with the Barr Foundation, which funds this program, and one that I'm very glad that Van Du, a new staff person in the Environment Department, and several other people at the agency in clean energy and environment are really working very hard to push forward. Lizzie is going to speak when she's on the line, and I don't think she's in the Zoom yet because she is at the very critical kindergarten graduation of her younger daughter, but she'll be joining us soon. She'll talk about a number of the items in government affairs, so I won't take time with that right now. There's a lot going on in land use. It's our largest department along with data services, so there's always a lot going on in land use. We divide that up in the report usually by main categories of our planning studies. You can take a look at them all. Zoning changes, master plan changes. There have been some critical improvements that were adopted recently in the town of Ashland. I'm not quite sure if those made it into the report, but that happened just a few days ago. And the great thing is that a number of our recommendations are being adopted by the cities and towns, which is all very positive news. I can't tell you that all the news is positive, however. I urge you to read the descriptions on Rentham and Dedham. And I will tell you that those projects have been challenging ones for our staff. I'm going to actually come back on screen for a moment so that I can actually see you all. In both of those communities, issues have arisen that have involved statements regarding race and diversity that are at the best discomforting and at worst racist. It is very difficult for our staff to deal with that, either in public conversation or in response to MAPC recommendations for the creation of a master plan or a housing production plan or whatever plan we need to be working on. I think all of you know Rentham and Dedham are not alone as communities where these issues have arisen. Very often they arise from a small number of residents, although sometimes these days they can be spread widely through social media. We have had to deal with these issues arising in communities throughout my tenure here. And sadly, I don't think it's going to change in the very near future. But what we are working on very hard is ways of preparing our staff to deal with these issues and interceding as senior leadership to address these issues as well. I am always open. Rebecca and I, Mark Rassicott and others are always open to advice from members of the board about ways to deal with these issues. It is sometimes the inclination of staff not to report on these items in executive director's report because they don't think sometimes that they should be talking about it, or they feel that it might reflect badly on them. I've spoken with the staff people. They knew that these issues were going to be raised today. I want us to be open and clear-eyed about them and to recognize that, it is our responsibility to try and address them. That doesn't always mean addressing them in public when they arise, but it always means raising them in some venue and trying to help a town to recognize them and to address them, a town or a city. And MAPC is very committed to doing that. We are also very committed to keeping our staff safe. And that means not only being physically safe, but feeling safe, whether they are in a virtual meeting or in a real meeting or a meeting with people actually present. So I wanted to mention that today. I'm going to complete the rest of the executive director's report. If people have anything to add, Adam, we can certainly come back to that when I'm finished, if that's okay. So many items in land use, a lot of them happier than that. And even in the case of Dedham and Rentham, we're going to get to good plans at the end. I'm quite confident about that. It just makes it a little difficult to do it all the time. So scrolling through land use, I'm going to note, I'm going to note particularly the Arlington Fair Housing Plan. Adam, of course, knows about this. Jenny was instrumental in it, even though she's not here today. I want to congratulate particularly Alexis Smith on the housing staff for doing the work of this plan. There was a time that we were actively engaged in fair housing planning. Jenna Erickson was actually one of the people who did that work in an earlier iteration of her career. But then during the Trump administration, with the repeal of the affirmatively furthering fair housing regulations, there wasn't as much work to do. And I'm hoping that Arlington is going to represent a recommencement of some of that work. It's a good plan with a lot of specific recommendations and actions for the community. And that is one item that I wanted to draw special attention to in the land use report. We're going to hear more about digital access from Josh soon. Municipal collaboration, we have cash upon cash upon cash, that's CACHE, that are being developed and that people are being trained to use. And the exciting thing now is that we are really already implementing some of the lessons that we learned during the pandemic to store up materials, to put them in places where municipalities can have access to them if there is an emergency, whether it's a pandemic or another sort of emergency, and to train people in accessing and using those materials. And I'm hoping that we're embarking on a year now at MAPC where we really say, what are the lessons we learned during the pandemic, and how are we going to apply those to change our practice and to help cities and towns change their practices? And this is one example, just one example of how we're doing that. Metro Common is moving forward smartly. I am hoping that we are going to meet our July deadline currently to complete it, and then we will be able to bring it to you for approval on the 22nd of September. Metro Common May was very successful, and both government affairs, strategic initiatives, and individual staff members have been putting in a tremendous amount of work on the policy recommendations, which I think are very strong. They're complicated, they're challenging to complete, they raise difficult issues sometimes, but I think they are very strong and a tremendous credit to us. In public health, I want to congratulate the team and also thank Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley for putting in tremendous efforts to try and fund the move of the location of the Cognitive Square Health Center, which is currently in Dorchester, of course, to open up a branch facility in Randolph. Randolph is a community without a health center at the moment. And that definitely showed during the pandemic. And again, we are working to change that, working with the town, working with Cognitive Square, and working with the Congresswoman's office to try and get that funded and off the ground. We're going to be very proud, I hope someday, to go to a groundbreaking there at the Randolph High School. We also did a great job at getting Public Health Excellent Grant Awards funded through DPH. And it looks now that we will be assisting at least, I think it's 7 groups of communities in implementing their Public Health Excellence Grant Awards, which generally involve the regionalization of public health delivery services. The last section by alphabet is transportation. Some really fabulous work going on there, particularly in the space that involves technology and transportation, both the income tiered electric community cash share program and our grant application with MIT to the National Science Foundation are both focused in that arena at the intersection of new technology with transportation. I'm very glad, particularly that our staff person, Allison Felix, does the organization so much credit by her knowledge and activity in that arena, which is increasingly important to transportation. And lastly, I'll close by welcoming Jesse Way, a great new member of our Clean Energy Department. You can read his bio at the very end of the report. Jesse will be a fabulous new addition to Clean Energy, which continues to do tremendous work on so many things. So that concludes my report. Adam, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any questions or comments regarding Mark's report? Buzz.
Thank you. I've share you. Thank you for reporting on the problem in the couple community meetings, Mark. And I think it is something that we have to. I think the executive committee should encourage you to deal with straight on as I think we need to do. It's a terribly important part of what we're doing. My question is whether the sub-regional groups as they meet would be a way to bring, professionals together to talk about how to get some momentum for helping people deal with the problems, which are in relatively few towns, I suspect. But it would seem to me that your staff can get to the sub-regional people with whom they work all the time, and communities would like their neighbors to back them up when they take tough positions. So I wonder whether you've thought about that.
Yeah, I think the sub-regions are an excellent place to try and address some of these questions. I think you need to prepare the sub-region for that conversation and get people in who are going to speak and who are going to respond. And I'm hopeful that it can be more than just a conversation, but also some follow-up actions and support for communities and support for people who are trying to do the right thing in communities. Josh Eichen is going to have, he's going to make the presentation on digital divide, but I also think he has an event coming up in July that is related to this issue. It's not exactly spot on, but it's certainly related to this issue overall. And I think subregions are a good place to try and address some of these issues.
Mo?
I think that this goes way beyond the regional problem, where people are angry in general, and I'm noticing that every issue that comes up immediately lead to accusations and anger. And I think it's partly related to the political situation in this country and to the pandemic, but people are all fried and angry everywhere you look. At least that's been true in Needham for this past year. And I'm seeing it everywhere else that I discuss this with other folks. So I think we need a lot of thought about how we approach this. It's not just us in this region, it's the whole state, and I think it's probably the country.
Well,
a lot of it has to do with social media as well.
I certainly agree with that. I know that I live with the old Yeats quote that the center does not hold. I hope it does, but I think a lot of us see in our cities and towns and increasing fracturing toward the extremes. And it makes it hard to have conversation, and it makes it hard to hold an extraordinarily important value in our work, which I think is that everybody, that we have a responsibility to treat everybody in a respectful manner, to listen to their perspective, to tell them honestly our perspective, but not in an accusatory way, and to try and bring people together toward consensus. Sometimes that consensus accomplishes everything you want to accomplish. More frequently, it accomplishes 10 to 20% of what you want to accomplish, and then next year you go back. But you have to be in a position where you can go back. And I will say honestly, for me personally, this is a struggle because, and I think it's a struggle for a lot of our staff, because sometimes we are very angry and upset and hurt. And we have to find a way to be clear about that and not allow hateful comments to go by the boards, and at the same time, maintain a respectful, communicative, and collaborative relation with people that tries to bring us a positive result in the end. The positive result generally being supported by the majority of people. I talk with my staff, I know Rebecca does, I know Mark does, I know other people do all the time about this balance. And it works better when the people in the mainstream are interested in the balance. When people are, extreme toward one another, it can make our role in that room much harder. But we have a responsibility to work in the world for good. We have a responsibility to work in the world we're in, not the world we wish we were in. And that's how we make it a better world. And I'd like to think that's what our staff is trying to do every day when they come to work. Other thoughts, certainly open to other thoughts, and not only in this meeting.
Yeah, I feel like we could certainly have a whole meeting about this very topic, but I can't say any better than what you just said, Mark, right? Approaching the work in the manner you described, I think is the only way the team can approach it. And my hat's off and thanks to you and the team for facing what you've been facing and continuing to push on in the manner in which you described. So thank you.
All right, I think ready to move on. I think we have legislative next, but I don't see Lizzie here yet. Sometimes she did say to me, sometimes these graduations go a little long.
Long speeches by the valedictorian, is that the?
Probably, I'm sure that's Hannah. So we could move on to Josh and then recircle. And of course, if Lizzie still isn't here, Rebecca is prepared, I think, to provide that update and the slideshow that goes with it.
So why don't we do that? I see Josh on my screen and ready. So why don't we go to agenda item number 8, and we'll turn it over to Josh Eichen.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone. Glad to be here today and to discuss MAPC's emerging work around digital access. I'm gonna attempt to share my screen here, so bear with me for one moment.
While I say that Josh is a senior planner in our economic development division, and he's joined by his boss, Betsy Cowan Neptune. And Josh has really played a leadership role in some of our efforts to deal with broadband issues in our communities.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I also will mention we are also joined by Ryan Kelly, MAPC's digital services manager, who's been working with Betsy and myself on issues of digital access broadly. And so again, we're really excited to be here today to talk to you all about this kind of emerging work at MAPC. So I'm going to give a quick presentation just to kind of give some context to the work that we are doing, the sort of priority areas. I'm going to talk a bit about the regional digital access and equity plans that we are working on. And then we'll wrap up with some discussion of like the next steps and where we're going with this work generally. So, so really just by way of overview, we entered this work a year ago, approximately at the beginning of the pandemic, where digital access issues were kind of forefront of everyone's mind. This is not an issue area that MAPC has done a ton of work in previously, but you know, due to the nature of COVID and remote everything, we very quickly realized this was something that was critical, not just for economic mobility, but related to many other different aspects of sort of civic life. And so we spent about 4 or 5 months really tuning up our team's capacity internally to kind of work on this issue. And through that process, we really landed on 5 sort of issue areas or 5 areas of work that we think we are well positioned as a regional planning agency to pursue. So the one that I'll talk about in depth today is the development of our municipal digital access and equity plans. But I also do want to mention that we are actively thinking about how we help municipalities procure equipment and services. So MAPC buys lots of stuff with municipalities through our public procurement, municipal collaboration departments. Digital infrastructure like fiber, equipment, et cetera, is no different. We think we could play a role in acquiring that equipment, as well as software, as data privacy and cybersecurity is a priority for pretty much every IT director in the region. We also see a natural connection with workforce development. We'll talk a bit about this in this conversation, but there's a real need to provide support to individuals in regards to not only the kind of physical installation of equipment that will be coming down the line, via the different funding sources from the federal government, but also to locally support individuals with literacy challenges. So there's a real connection to workforce that we can talk a bit more about. Policy areas. I don't think that there would be a MAPC project or sort of issue area if there wasn't some sort of policy implication, which there are many here in regards to how the internet is regulated at state, local, and federal levels, permits, et cetera. So there's a number of policy items that we're thinking about. And then data transparency and accessibility. And this really relates to a lot of the work that Ryan's team does and was really kind of what sort of helped us enter into much of this work, which is being able to kind of open up the box around data related to this issue. I will say at the outset here, digital access is not something that many, or I would say any of our municipalities have done a lot of thinking about. There's really a lot of limited capacity in this space. Much of what we've been doing over the last year has really been helping our municipalities, scale up around this topic area, understand really what's going on and how to evaluate it. And also say that, currently it's no one's job to solve the digital divide right now. And there's many different stakeholders who are working on this in different ways. And so, again, one of the things we're trying to do is sort of help everybody see the broad picture and how they all relate to each other, related to this topic. So I'm going to dive in a little bit here related to our municipal digital access and equity plans and give you a quick overview of some of the work and some of our findings. So we are doing this work in 3 communities right now, Everett, Chelsea, Revere. Chelsea and Revere, we are doing this as a dual community project, so it's a regional effort. But both sets of plans really focus on 3 things. So the outcome will hopefully advise capital investment that the communities can make, inform policy decisions, and identify program needs. And the capital investment is really thinking about Arpa and what's coming down the pipe for the federal government as well as the state government. Regarding policy, this is really where we get into discussions of permitting and navigating franchise agreements with cable operators, and identifying program needs really speaks to issues of literacy, device access, et cetera. So there's kind of different components of this. Just as a very sort of broad overview of the process that we engage in. So this process is actually very similar to master plan or housing production plan, in that you kind of start with an existing conditions evaluation, you get some information from the community, you take a look at what might be a little bit different, the infrastructure and the technology that exists in the space, and then you kind of smash it all together into a plan and program development. I will note that in phase 1B outlined here, our community needs assessment, we've done deployed a survey in these 3 cities. Currently, we've got about 1,800 responses. So these notes here are a little outdated. But what we found really interesting is that this is an issue that resonates with people. People are excited to talk about this issue. It is, it impacts their daily lives, obviously. And I can also say that we've gotten at least half of all responses in a language other than English. So either Spanish, Arabic, Portuguese, or Khmer. The way that we think about digital access, and really what we're talking about is kind of the stool and an individual's ability to use the internet to the extent that they need to in their daily life. So whether it's for work, education, healthcare, navigating social services, checking the T schedule, et cetera. That's kind of like the sort of the top layer of how we describe digital access. That top layer sits on 3 legs. So you can think of this like a stool. Those legs are connection, so an individual's connection to the internet, and also whether it is a fast connection and an affordable connection. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Whether an individual or household has access to an adequate device. We understand, everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket these days, which are great for communication, but it's really hard to do your homework on a smartphone. Similarly, it's hard to work on a smartphone. And also needing to have a good router. This comes up a lot in our work that, individuals' routers are maybe old and not supporting the speeds that they need, and that impacts their ability to use the internet. And then literacy, which is possibly the most important one. So this, includes not only the use of technology, being able to use a laptop, but also ensuring that the equipment is functioning properly, and also evaluating the quality of information and privacy risks that one might encounter on the internet. I'm going to start here with just a quick data snapshot. And so Ryan and his team put this neat chart for us together. And without getting too deep into it, basically, this is publicly available data on people who have taken internet speed tests in our 3 communities, Chelsea, Everett, and Revere. What is important to note about this data is that the orange box here represents individuals whose speed tests are less than 25 megabits per second download speed. Basically, that is the threshold that the FCC has established for good internet. It is objective at best, it is outdated, but it's kind of what we're working with right now. And what we notice from this data is that about 1/3 of folks who have a wired connection, so they have a cable connection, are not getting high-speed internet, or that they're not hitting that threshold. And then more than half of folks who are using a mobile connection, so this is a hotspot device, something that a school district or one of the workforce boards have given out to someone, are not hitting that threshold. So we kind of began with this point of like, all right, well, lots of folks in these communities just aren't, their internet is poor. This is not even accounting for the folks who don't have internet at all. And that was sort of kind of our starting point, our entry point into these conversations with these communities, because they kind of came to us and were like, anecdotally, we hear that the internet is terrible. We get dropped video calls from our select board meetings. Kids can't get online for school. What's going on? So we're starting with this sort of data set. I'll also note we have this for upload speed as well, which is really critical for Zoom calls. I won't get too much into this, but you see a similar trend, about 1/3 of folks with the wire connection, about half folks with a mobile connection. Getting into folks that don't have a connection at all. So we do have some good data from the ACS that tells us about the percent of folks in different communities who have broadband internet connection. In the 3 that we're working with, about 15% to 20% of individuals, or households, I should say, do not have an internet connection. That number jumps up far, up and up when you look at income brackets. So close to 40% of Everett households earning less than 20K per year lack internet service. And then a number of folks rely on smartphones. Household size further complicates all of these issues. So we know that in Chelsea and Revere, the majority of households, or about half of these households, are multifamily or multi-individual households. So 30% have 3 to 4 people, 20% in Chelsea, 11% in Revere have more than 5 people. And really the complication here is that required speed in order to use the internet needs to be, you need to have faster speed the more people that you need to use the internet. So I won't get too much into this, but that's basically the takeaway. And those faster speeds, when you buy them from the internet service provider, are more expensive. The implication is that folks may not be able to afford the speeds that they require, and that is likely impacting their service that they're receiving in their homes. We've also looked a lot at internet subsidies that exist. Pre-COVID, there's the FCC mandates that certain telco and cable providers offer what's called a lifeline service plan. So it's an income eligible service plan for basic internet service. And eligibility is usually if you receive free or reduced school lunch, if you're on a Pell Grant, anything like that. Comcast Internet Essentials, $10 a month. We found through our sort of assessment here and from Comcast directly that only 3,700 households in Chelsea and Revere are taking advantage of the Internet Essentials program, where about 8,000 and likely more than that are eligible for Internet Essentials. Under ARPA, there's a funding source for a program known as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which is a $50 subsidy for income eligible individuals to use against internet service. We have heard anecdotally that there's very low uptake on that program. There's actually a dashboard, and maybe Ryan can pop in the chat here, that tracks adoption by state. I think last I checked, Massachusetts was around 30,000 people who have adopted the EBB program. So anyways, why don't people take advantage? Because these programs are really complicated. They have lots of barriers. They take a long time to sort of fill out online. They require a lot of documentation. The EBB program requires a social security number and a photo ID, which immediately turns off a large proportion of the population, particularly the immigrant community, who may have concerns about sharing that kind of data or information with a government entity. And so the finding here is that there is a need for a sort of a middle path or an alternative in order to get to the folks that are eligible for these programs and get them deployed and adopted. I'm going to talk quickly about devices here. So we mentioned that this is one of the sort of fundamental legs of our digital access stool. So as we looked at earlier, about 12% of households don't have a computing device in these communities. In our survey, we heard from about a quarter of folks say that they disagree with the statement, people in my household always have access to a computer if needed. We know that about 60% of Chelsea and Revere households lease a router from their service provider. That's probably, there's actually probably a higher number because a lot of folks just didn't know. And as I said earlier, approximately 1,100 households in Chelsea may be relying on T-Mobile hotspots for internet service. So, really these devices, there is a need to also improve the device access within these communities. And then literacy. As I said, again, this is one of the most important components of the digital access tool. Through our survey, we asked a number of questions about literacy. We found that about 3/4 of folks agree with the statement, I feel confident in my ability to use a computer or laptop, but about 50% responded that they feel confident in resolving issues related to internet connection. So it's really interesting to kind of see that disparity. That's like, folks, there's a basic level of understanding, although I should note, a quarter of folks don't have that basic level of understanding and literacy, but then a large swath of the community don't feel confident in being able to troubleshoot internet issues. So, if something happens, cat walks on your keyboard, turns off your Wi-Fi, folks are not sure how to kind of address that. And then anecdotal information that we hear is that there are serious concerns related to privacy, particularly among the immigrant population, which makes up a significant percentage of the population in 3 communities that we are working with currently. And this relates to the adoption of the income eligible plans as well. But this is, we heard for some of the folks who don't have internet by choice because they feel concerned about privacy. So just to kind of, summarize the issue as we are experiencing it, as we are observing it in the communities that we are doing this work in. And I didn't talk about all of this, so I'll just kind of give a quick rundown. But, one, cable infrastructure at the household level is impacting service and reliability. We didn't, this discussion didn't get into the nature of cable franchise agreements and monopoly cable service providers in different communities, but it's an issue that we are, evaluating and considering seriously. Related to that, lack of competition from cable providers, as well as lower income service area, are likely disincentives for investment from the private sector. We know there's not a lot of competition, which has an impact on price. At the household level, individuals are likely using outdated or ineffective routers and devices. And again, this impacts speed, which impacts individuals' ability to use the internet. Internet subscribers may not have the confidence or technical skills to troubleshoot internet speed or function issues. In the literacy space, that larger households who may need faster speed packages may be cost burdened, unable to afford those plans, and individuals who are eligible for subsidized services may not be taking advantage of them due to a lack of information, trust, stable housing, documentation, or other structural and social factors. So this is the kind of rundown on the digital divide, again, as we are observing them in these 3 communities. But I would say, I would wager that these issues are likely representative of many communities in the MAPC region particularly those with clear and present digital access issues. This is the kind of the summary point of where we are now in our work. We are going to be moving into thinking about strategies and recommendations in the coming months here. So we don't have all the solutions yet, but this is our kind of, these are the issues that we're trying to solve. And really, as I said at the beginning of this, part of this whole process is just being able for us to understand what these issues are and articulate them to our partners in these communities. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan here to quickly talk about some of the work that we are doing in other areas, including procurement. So Ryan, I'm going to advance the slide here and turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Josh. So this slide here is a snapshot from work in Everett. Speaks to one of the ways of organizing the data to help think through this issue. The map you see here is colored by the census data Josh was referencing earlier about connected households that are not connected to the internet. So we see certain pockets where there's a high percentage of users that have been identified of not having the internet. And as we collect data and work with the cities to find those areas of need, it aligns with different opportunities for different assets. So on this map, we've highlighted some of those assets, be the school buildings, certainly the housing authority properties, and the purple lines are some of those commercial fiber lines, some actually where the fiber, fast fiber is today. You can see there are opportunities spatially between the different groups that I think are ripe areas for capital investment and could provide opportunities. Specifically, the one Josh is highlighting there around the Everett High School in the dark red census track. Certainly the school, from speaking with them and the data about Everett, a lot of the hotspot uses were to that area and allocated there, and certainly an area of need, but also has an area of taller high school that has access, some structural access and fiber access. So it could be areas for opportunity to spend some capital and bring faster internet to those that need it. So the current those funds and the capital opportunities, the one that's with us today is the Mass Broadband Institute partnership with MBI to spend around $100,000 per community with our gateway cities on Wi-Fi installations. So in that example there with the high school, we're working through different opportunities and trying to right now find areas of need of where Wi-Fi would be beneficial, be that in housing and affordable housing, in downtown areas, at farmers markets. Are there places that have some capital now that could be improved to reach more people? Are there areas of need that need investment? So we have some money right now that we're looking to find opportunities in the gateway cities, specifically Chelsea, Everett, Revere, as well as Malden and Quincy in our region. The larger funds that are on the way, the American Rescue Plan, certainly this is a larger, longer-term investment of which broadband infrastructure does qualify. Working regionally on this one to find out what opportunities are there for us to efficiently and effectively spend this money. Hopefully convening a group coming up at the end of the month to talk about this in more detail of what opportunities are out there, what things can we best spend it on? And for MAPC, how can we help facilitate that work, both through the data side, but also on our procurement side of how can we help facilitate and make it easier to do the right thing?
Great. Thanks, Ryan. So just to kind of wrap us up here, the additional areas of work, as Ryan mentioned, the MBI Gateway City Wi-Fi grant is one of the other projects that we're working on. Also, as Ryan mentioned, we are doing regional coordination around this issue. We are bringing folks together at the end of this month, the second of a series of conversations to talk about priorities for ARPA between a number of different stakeholders. We are also working with the Mass Hire System to deploy digital navigators under the YouthWorks program funding structure in different eligible communities. And so these would be young people who could receive a stipend and some training to basically become a local resource to help folks who might be having digital access issues and help them navigate around those challenges. So this has been, really just wanted to give this this group and the committee here an overview of the work that we're doing in this space. And I know that there's a packed agenda, but we're happy to take any questions or thoughts at this time if folks want to jump in.
So thank you very much, Josh and Ryan, for the presentation. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments?
I have a question for Josh.
Yeah, go ahead.
In your presentation, there was a slide. It was the one, I think it's for Everett, of depending on household size, you know, you should in theory have even greater bandwidth.
Mhm.
And at the bottom, there was something like $1 range. Was that, and they were very low. So I was wondering what those were. Was that what you deem as should be affordable to those households to pay every month for internet?
No, yeah, that's a great question. So here, I'll bring it back up here real quick. So let's see. So this slide that you're referring to?
I can.
Oh, can folks see? You're not seeing my screen?
I think we're on.
I see a screen, but it's only the Everett map.
Sorry, apologies. Let me see if I can back down the right screen here. All right, this screen.
Yeah, so
Okay.
at the bottom it says, you know, like $10 to $30 per month, 35 to 50, 50 to 70. Yeah.
Yeah. Those Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we pulled those directly from the service providers, right?
Yeah, there. It's All Connect was the source, which is an aggregate of service provider data, and that is certainly a lower estimate, but a bare minimum way of looking at price that would be needed. There's certain different ways. Certainly, one of the stats is like on upload is very important. In that 25/3, for a Zoom call like this one is about 3 megabits of upload. So it's something that's needed, and if that's shared between more than one person, it degrades the service.
No, but in terms of dollar amounts, that's what the providers provided. So that's what they should pay, or
At a aggregate level for this source across the state, sometimes those options aren't available. There is a big jump in our area from a $10 plan to, I think the next is a $50 plan. So there may not be an option for $35 in there, and or $30, but nationally those options are available.
Yeah, and I think that these may be subject to some of like the incentives that the different service providers offer. When you sign up, you know, you get a lower price, but then a couple years in or a year in, it kicks into a higher, you know, price point or whatever when the incentive runs out. And that $10 price point is representative of the Comcast Internet Essentials program, which is the income eligible program.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angie. Any other questions for Josh or Ryan? All right, I think that's evidence of a job well done and a thorough presentation, so thank you.
Thanks all.
I would just note Josh and Ryan have been doing a tremendous amount of work on this issue. Digital services, economic development, municipal collaboration. Rebecca personally have been all very much involved in trying to ramp up our efforts at MAPC to do more work in the digital area. And I hope that with ARPA funding coming and with fingers crossed infrastructure coming, we will be able to only expand our efforts to serve in this regard. So thanks to all of them and to all of you for your interest in it.
Thank you, Mark. And I see that we have Lizzie, so I think we're ready. Congratulations on the kindergarten graduation.
Thank you.
So I think we're ready to move to the Legislative Committee. Keith, do you have any introductory remarks, or do you want to start right with Lizzie?
Sure. Thanks very much. The Legislative Committee did not meet this month, but we are scheduled to meet next month. Nevertheless, the legislature met and was busy, and there's been lots for MAPC staff to keep track of, even with late breaking news today, just before we started this Zoom meeting, which we weren't sure if we could do or not. So, but anyway, we're here and happy to have Lizzie join us, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Keith. Yes, for those of you wondering, it was a completely adorable kindergarten graduation morning, and weirdly emotional in these sort of post-pandemic times. So the legislature has been really busy, like he said. I'm going to kind of quickly run through some of the things that we're watching and we're involved with, and then I'm going to turn over to a brief presentation about Arpa, the thing on everyone's mind. So in terms of what's moving right now, like he said, the legislature yesterday, finally, I wish I could have said just in the nick of time, but it was just after the nick of time, which was challenging, passed legislation extending many of the provisions that were granted during the emergency, the state of emergency, which expired yesterday. So we'll send around a summary of everything that moved, but I think the highlight reel is that remote meetings, remote participation are all allowed until April of 2022. Some of the provisions, they sort of had to compromise between the House and the Senate around some of the permitting around outdoor dining and takeout alcohol. And I think the final landing was on May of 2022. And then the other piece that MAPC was watching really closely was around the extension of the tenant protections. And those actually moved even a little further than we had originally hoped. We thought they would end at the end of the calendar year, but they did extend them also into the spring of 2022. I'd say in all of those instances, we've already started having conversations with the legislature that these extensions of those provisions are themselves temporary, and that the legislature does want to actually figure out how to put some permanent pieces in place. And they're really eager to work with us. So we've already started having some of those conversations with folks in the Senate President's Office and Senate Ways and Means and House Ways and Means. And we are eager to see some of those protections kind of continue longer term. So stay tuned for that. And like I said, we will send out a summary of everything that was included in the bill that was signed today. Other pieces that are moving, the supplemental budget is moving. It's an important supplemental budget. There's sort of two pieces we're watching in there. The first is around provisions that would extend some of the voting procedures that were put in place during the pandemic, the mail-in voting and sort of remote voting options. So we're watching that. And then the other piece that looks like it's probably going to move inside the supplemental budget is Mbta Governance, because as of the end of this month, the Mbta will no longer have a fiscal management control board, and it will revert back to the MassDOT board sitting as the Mbta board. So we just had a meeting about that with we just had a meeting about that yesterday with Senator Boncore's office. And then the last piece is that the governor also unveiled a pretty robust capital plan. And I think, a lot of times we sort of, that kind of flies a little bit under our radar, but I think it's a really important proposal that's out there right now, particularly because of all the ARPA dollars that are out there. That, I do think some of those dollars could end up sort of being a bit of a down payment for some of those future capital investments that the administration really wants to see. So I want to quickly talk also about the state budget. I think we are feeling like we're in pretty good shape. The legislature is working on their sort of typical timeline on the budget, which is really great to see that we are not in the situation we were in last fiscal year, that they're going to extend those budget conversations far into session. I think that they're going to be pretty close to on time. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a 1/12 budget for the month of July, like we often do, and then see the conference committee reconcile some of those pieces into August. But I don't think it'll drag out forever and ever like it did last year. And we will have a letter to the conference committee, which we're happy to share with all of you. But I think, as everyone knows, we're asking for $3 million for DLTA, and the Senate number on Shannon, where they came in at $12.3 million. So getting us close to that historic high that we used to have on Shannon funds, but not quite there yet. I want to just stop there. And I want to be able to have some time for this ARPA presentation, because I think there might be questions, but I just want to see if there are any questions, or if my team had anything to add on the pieces I just went through very quickly. I think Leah was going to say something about the capital budget. Yeah.
Just really quickly, the EEA lines in the capital budget increased by about $70 million, including an $11 million increase on Green Communities program and a $9 million increase on the MVP program. So MVP is now 21 and Green Communities is 20. So I know those are programs that are heavily subscribed to by communities. So that's really great news.
Thanks, Leah. All right. Seeing no other questions, Adam, is it okay if I go to the ARPA presentation now?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to try to share my screen. It sometimes is a little wonky. So let's see if it works. Can folks actually see that, or does it just look like a black screen?
Black screen of death.
I'm worried about that. It has not been working for me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but it does not like me. I believe somebody somebody on my team has a copy of it.
Yeah, I can try doing that. Give me 1 second.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to test this ahead of time, folks. That looks like it, Diego. Thank you. If you want to scroll up to the beginning. And I think you want to be in presenter mode because it's showing both pieces.
Not sure how to make it in presenter mode, so you guys can just see everything I'm seeing.
Possible that Sasha might have some advice here. Oh, there we go.
Is that good?
Skin is huge. I don't know what it is. Let's see.
It cuts out part of the slide.
Yeah, it did.
Sorry, folks. I'm not sure then.
Let's see. Just looking.
It looks good now.
It's just it cuts off half the slide. Let's see. Sorry.
Give me guys. Sorry, give me 1 second.
I can try it. Can tag team.
Do you have? Yeah. Let's see. All right, that looks great. We can even just keep it up like that.
Let me see if I can do slideshow mode. Okay.
That's it.
Sorry, it's on a
All right.
roll.
Thank you. All right, Leah, so I'll just do the next slide thing and we'll go through.
Great.
Thanks. Awesome. All right, we can even start here. So ARPA was, the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law on March 11th. It was really designed to be a recovery bill, which is different than the relief bills that we saw under the CARES Act. And I think that's an important distinction because you kind of see that theme of recovery running through all of the guidance that we have. There was a lot of speculation about what ARPA was and what it wasn't, but the Treasury did actually release materials associated with what's called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. So those are what we're typically calling the ARPA dollars, but are the technical term for the money that's coming to cities and towns and to the Commonwealth. When they released that guidance, they released an interim final rule and an FAQ. The FAQ is a totally manageable 8 pages, and the IFR is a bit of a lengthy 151 pages, but you really get the gist if you read the fact sheet, the fact sheet page. When they released the guidance, they also updated some of the state and local funding amounts. And I think one of the things that's important to think about is that throughout all of the ARPA dollars that are coming to cities and towns and counties into the Commonwealth, all of those funds have to be obligated by December 31st of 2024, but they don't have to be spent until December 31st, 2026. And even in the guidance, they talk about trying to add in some flexibility there so that we can really get the maximum use for the dollars. Diego has put a link to the IFR and the fact sheet in the chat. Next slide. So these are our overall funding amounts. The state is getting $5.3 billion. There's already kind of a tension between the administration and the legislature about who gets to actually spend those dollars. So last week, one of the things that the legislature did do was they kind of swept the money and they created a fund that that would essentially take that $5.3 billion and give them the authority about how it would be spent. The governor pushback right away. He has not signed that yet. So I think we're all kind of, it's like that popcorn GIF trying to watch and see what's going to happen between the legislature and the administration on those dollars. But I think it's safe to say we're already weighing in both with the legislature and the administration about how they should be thinking about that. Local governments, and so that's cities, towns, and counties, got a total of $3.4 billion. So again, our state total is $8.7 billion. Our cities, towns, and counties are getting their money in 2 tranches. So they get, some of them already have their money now, and then they'll get another check sometime within the next 11 months. But at the state level, we were one of 22 states who got all of our money at once. So we got all $5.3 billion, and it's here. It's a pretty big check. Next slide. So these are the broad eligible uses of the ARPA dollars. So the 4 main categories are responding to the public health emergency, providing premium pay to employees that with a special connection to essential work. I'll go into that more in a second. Addressing revenue loss. So this is about providing government services to the extent that there was a reduction in revenue, and infrastructure dollars with a specific investment in sewer, water, or broadband infrastructure. Next slide. So these are the prohibited uses. On its face, they really only talk about 2 prohibited uses, but when you read through all of the guidance, there really are actually 4 prohibited uses. So you can't actually spend your ARPA dollars to offset a reduction in taxes. You can't directly deposit ARPA dollars into a pension fund, but there's like a long discussion inside the interim final rule about being able to, if you bring on new employees and that comes with pension obligations, you can pay the pension obligations for that new employee that you've brought on with your ARPA funds, assuming that you're bringing that person on to make up for a position that was lost during COVID. You can't use ARPA dollars for debt servicing, but you can use it for essentially PAYGO infrastructure investment. So, but again, the guidance kind of gives a lot of parameters around the difference there, but they are clear that you can't use it on debt financing instruments. And then you can't just directly take your ARPA funds and deposit them into a rainy day or a stabilization fund. But again, inside the guidance, there's a lot of nuance about how you can essentially, using the revenue loss projections, use ARPA dollars to help address shortfalls that you had in previous years. But these are essentially the 4 prohibited uses. Next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is this responding to the public health emergency category. As you can see, it's really pretty broad about what it means to be spending those dollars on responding to the public health emergency. A lot of the things are things I think we would kind of immediately think about. So that first bucket around COVID-related costs, so testing, contact tracing, PPE, vaccines, and then, and you can use it for clinics, you can use it for boosters, you can use it for communications, anything kind of directly related to COVID is essentially considered a COVID-related cost. But you can also use it for staffing back up. That's particularly true in the public sector. You can use it for all kinds of small business and nonprofit assistance. You can actually make direct payments out of this bucket to impacted industries in your community. All kinds of public health investments, so it's staff, infrastructure, facilities. They specifically call it unemployment assistance and jobs training. And then there's a category around addressing food or housing or financial insecurity. The last bucket under the responding to the public health emergency that they call out in the guidance is this aid to disproportionately impacted communities. And I just want to talk about that for one more second. I think that the next slide actually goes into that a little bit more. Yeah, so this is what aid to disproportionately impacted communities means inside the Treasury guidance. The important thing to note here is that in the Commonwealth, there's a couple different ways the guidance gives us to actually define disproportionately impacted communities. One of the ways, and the way I expect that we'll use in the Commonwealth, is qualified census tracts. There are 312 qualified census tracts inside Massachusetts that affects a total of 49 municipalities. It's about 1.3 million people. And within those qualified census tracts, and it actually like sheets to the entire municipality, any investment that is made to help disproportionately impacted communities is considered an eligible expense. It is deemed an eligible COVID expenditure. And I think what you actually see in the guidance is that this is the way that the guidance is trying to ensure that ARPA dollars are spent to address inequities. And you can see they're talking about a pretty broad set of inequities. So they're talking about, they actually use the word social determinants of health. I thought like, only MAPC and our public health allies use that, but it's actually in federal guidance, which is great. They talk about investing in housing and neighborhoods, and they specifically call out affordable housing development. And this educational disparities bucket, again, it's really big. They call out Head Start, they call out tutoring and after school programs. They actually call out behavioral and mental health needs for children and youth. And then it's, again, kind of connected to the last bucket there, which is about promoting healthy childhood environments. They're talking about childcare programs, in particular, home visitation, foster care services. So you can see it's a pretty broad swath of investments that are, again, deemed eligible COVID expenses if you're investing in these buckets in these disproportionately impacted communities. I think it's really important because I've been doing government work for a long time, and I've never seen guidance like this that's so clear and specific about addressing investing these dollars very specifically in communities that suffered disproportionately from COVID. Next slide. So those last two things I was talking about were all in that first bucket of the COVID-related public health expenses. The next two are around revenue replacement and premium pay. I think those of you who are working in cities and towns, that the revenue replacement calculation is not uncomplicated. You basically have to create a counterfactual scenario based on the revenue that you would have collected, but for COVID. And that's essentially the delta that you're able to make up. And again, they do remind, again, once again, inside the guidance, they sort of talk about these 4 ways that you are not allowed to spend the money if you are doing revenue replacement. You can't actually do the revenue replacement to invest in these pieces. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. You're allowed to do the revenue replacement for more than one fiscal year. So it's this fiscal year up through, I want to say 2023 is the last one you can take. So you do 2020, 2021, 2022 and 2023. And just as a reminder, the federal fiscal year is on the calendar, making it more complicated for a lot of communities in Massachusetts. This next category around premium pay, I think a lot of us really thought in the beginning that it was just about making payments inside the public sector, but you can actually provide grants to private employers as well. And again, the guidance, it's another one of the places where in the guidance, they spend a lot of time talking about the inequities in our workforce. And so they actually specifically call out prioritizing pay for lower income workers. And if you end up creating a payment that is somebody's receiving too large, it's over 150% of their existing base pay, you have to provide additional fairly significant documentation if you're actually going to be doing that. They call out specific sectors that they see as essential workers. They talk about healthcare, nursing, farm and food, public health, human and social services. Next slide. The last category of eligible uses is around water, sewer, and broadband. So a lot of those things that Josh was just talking to you about in terms of need around digital divide are going to end up being eligible uses under ARPA. I think importantly, under the water and sewer investments, they do actually call out climate change. They acknowledge climate change exists, it's real, and they talk about making investments that would address the impacts of climate change. And then I also thought it was really interesting that any projects that happen under this infrastructure category, again, the guidance mentions that the project should be using strong labor standards. So community benefit agreements, an increase above prevailing wage, and provisions that require or encourage local hires. Next slide. think the last piece I just wanted to highlight is that there are reporting requirements when it's a little different than CARES, a little more robust, I think. So there are different deadlines, whether you're a state or an entitlement community receiving dollars versus non-entitlement communities. So the state has to do essentially, and entitlement communities have to do an initial interim report, which is essentially a summary of all the expenditures by next August. And then, or this August, I'm sorry, and then quarterly reports starting in October of this year. Then the non-entitlement communities essentially do an annual report, and the first one is due in October. And then, interestingly, I think this is only, this doesn't apply to that many entities in Massachusetts, but municipalities or counties that are themselves receiving money with a population over 250,000 have to do what's called an annual recovery plan and performance report. And Treasury has promised that more guidance is coming on that. I just realized one of the things I didn't note is that counties that exist in Massachusetts do get their own distribution. Counties that are defunct, the money passes directly through to the municipalities, and municipalities are receiving $194 per person if their county is defunct. And then the last thing I should just note on that is like how munis get the money. So if you're an entitlement community, you've probably already gotten your check. If you're a non-entitlement community, that money will come through the way you get your usual local aid dollars. And so unfortunately, Adam, it will not be one of those big Publishers Clearinghouse checks, but I really want someone to take a picture that looks like that because I think that would be really fabulous. It's a lot of zeros. I'm pretty sure that's the last slide I had. And I'm happy, so I can stop sharing. I know we're like basically at time. But I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have about this. I've obviously done a lot of like deep dive into this. It doesn't, my guess is we won't have time for questions now, but folks know where to find me.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. You may have already done this, but if you could share that PowerPoint with the committee, that was a super helpful presentation.
Yeah, happy to.
No, it's strictly embargoed. We only let Lizzie share that if she gets paid extra.
We'll bring in a big Publishers Clearinghouse check if you share the PowerPoint.
Really want
Lizzie is now sought after really for expertise in this arena. Yeah. And I'm very proud of her and all the work she's done to make MAPC knowledgeable about this very important opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. So like I said, as folks are thinking about using the money or working with communities, feel free to reach out because we're here to help. And we are, like I said, already advocating directly to the legislature and the administration about how they should be spending it.
Great. So I saw Sandra and Angie raise their hands. So Sandra, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Adam. I guess I should hold off. I was just going to ask more information about how MAPC might be getting involved in this, but I imagine you have to wait for the money to be sort of specific.
I actually was going to jump into that. So I will give just a very high level overview of kind of the different ways. So, obviously there's a lot of different things we can be doing, and there's the two kind of big buckets of money. There's the money going to the state and there's the money going to cities and towns. And so, in both ways, I think we're trying to put out broad principles and in many different forums, kind of talking about what the eligible uses are and how they should be used. Specifically, and I saw Betsy on here earlier, we're already working with groups of communities to come up with project proposals. So a lot of work around small business technical assistance, thinking about how can we support minority and women-owned businesses with some of these fundings. We have another call that's going on around broadband expansion and how can we really conquer some of those digital divide issues using some of the municipal dollars. And then on the state, dollars, we're already meeting we've met, I think, with almost every state department now, kind of really thinking about what are ways that we could leverage the funding. So really trying to create state programs that could create a match for community dollars, and we could really leverage those state and local dollars, whether it be climate resiliency or digital access or homelessness prevention. I think there's a lot of opportunities to try to pull the funding together. Specifically, we've been very engaged on an issue, the entitlement community formula that the federal government uses is an outdated formula. And some of our very highly impacted communities, including Chelsea, I see John on the phone, we're actually really receiving a very disproportionately low amount of money for the federal government because they aren't technically a entitlement community. And so, working with Tom Ambrosino and the governor are really trying to put some data behind that and look at making sure some of those communities are receiving funding from the state funding to make up for a gap in that federal funding. And we successfully secured for, I believe it's Randolph and Chelsea in our region, additional dollars so that they can get the same level as funding in communities. So just some of the things, and I think many more to come, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think a lot of search for guidance, both from state and local officials on what to do with this.
I'll add a couple of things, Adam, if I could, to follow up on what Rebecca had to say. We also serve on a working group that the Lieutenant Governor put together with mayors and managers, and the MMA is there as well, focused on ways in which the administration is thinking about spending its dollars. And we had a meeting of that group about a week ago, and it was interesting to see all of the different topic areas in which they're thinking of using funds, and also very satisfying to me, the heavy emphasis on equity in most of those expenditure categories. They did talk a little bit about sort of matching dollars with localities. There can be good and bad in that because, they could be looking for a kind of a local match to do a particular project. They'll throw in some dollars, you'll throw in some dollars. That can be a good thing. It can also be the kind of thing that gets a little out of control and requires municipal money all the time. So I think we want to try and be cautious about that. Public health was not on the list, oddly, and we pushed for public health to be put on the list. Housing, climate resilience, small business, a wide variety of other topics were very clearly on the list already. I know that you can tell this from what Rebecca and Lizzie both said. We are putting a very heavy emphasis on encouraging the Commonwealth and cities and towns to first use the money for equity. There are ways in every topic area to focus on equity and to focus on those who have been disproportionately harmed by the pandemic. That's true in housing, it's true in climate, it's true in small business, it's true in a wide variety of areas. And my hope is that we're going to be able to spend a substantial percentage of this money to advance equity in the Commonwealth in a way that we don't usually have the dollars to do. Probably not every dollar, but hopefully a lot. And my hope is that localities will look for those opportunities as well, and not simply rely upon the state to fill that need and fill that gap.
Great, thank you, Mark. So we're over time for good reason. Very, very helpful discussion and presentation. Is there any other new business? Or I guess I should mention that our next meeting is July 21st from 11:30 to 1. And is there any other business before I call the roll to adjourn? Sandra?
Should we say that we are canceling the August meeting or no?
So yeah, is that a yes, Mark and Rebecca? Then yes.
I thought we had put that out already. I'm sorry if we didn't, but we did discuss it at officers. We are going to probably hold the July meeting, and of course the September meeting will be on the 22nd of September, but we will cancel the August executive committee meeting.
Great. Erin would have had you here for August, but I'm giving you the break, so I want everybody to remember that. All right, with that, I think we're pretty low on attendance here, but I'll run through the roll if we can get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's made by Sandra, seconded by Tabor. And now let me just bring up my roster. Sharonda? Keith?
Aye.
I vote yes. Bob Cohen, not here. Mayor Curtatoni's not here. John DePriest?
Yes.
Yolanda? Sandra?
Yes.
Mo? Tabor?
Yes.
Angie? I believe Angie left. Steve?
Yes.
Caitlin's not here. George?
Yes.
Courtney? Jenny's not here. Vandana?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
I think we lost Steve Silvera. Lauren Shirtliff? Mayor Spicer? Juan Vega, also not here. Elaine? And Aaron's not here. All right, motion to adjourn is unanimous. Thank you everyone for the time and the excellent content today. I appreciate it.